My name is David Chen. I worked the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store in suburban Denver for 3 years. People think night shift is boring. It isn't. It's the time when different rules apply. It started in my second month. Around 2 a.m., a man would come in. Same time, 3 times a week. He never bought anything. He'd walk to the back of the store, stand in front of the refrigerated section for exactly 7 minutes, staring at nothing, then leave. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of stillness that made you aware of your own breathing. I mentioned it to my manager. He said, "Yeah, we know about him. Don't engage." That should have been my first warning. One night, around 1:45 a.m., a woman came in, young, maybe mid-20s, with a bruise on her neck shaped like fingers. She bought a pack of gum and a bottle of water, paid cash, avoided eye contact. She left through the back emergency exit, which was alarming because it triggers a sensor. But she was fast. I almost didn't register it. The next night, the same man came in at exactly 2 a.m. He went to the back, to the refrigerated section, and he was talking to himself, not mumbling, full sentences. "She's not going back," he said. "She's done running." He said it with absolute certainty, with possession. I was 24 years old and trying to put myself through community college. I was exhausted on night shift, and I was afraid to do anything. I didn't call the police. I told myself it wasn't my business. That was my second mistake. The man continued coming for another week. His monologues became more specific. He talked about where she'd go, who she'd contact. He mapped out her movements like he'd already lived through them, like they were inevitable. One night he looked directly at me and said, "You're going to want to forget this. Make sure you do." Then he left, and I never saw him again. 2 weeks later, there was a news story. A woman named Sarah Hendricks, mid-20s, worked at a law firm downtown, had been found in a creek bed about 40 miles north. She'd been reported missing 5 days prior. Her ex-boyfriend was arrested. The details matched what that man had been saying in my store. Not exactly. Close enough that I recognized the prediction in the reporting. Close enough that I understood he'd known, that he'd been speaking her future into existence, or confirming a future he'd already decided on. I reported it all to police. They took a statement. They never called back. I don't know if they found the man. I don't know if he was arrested, or if he simply moved to a different store, a different convenience mart, in a different suburb, working his way through the night shift world like a predator following a specific scent. What I do know is that night shift work changed something in me. I became aware that you can exist in a space, a real, physical, documented space, and witness things that no one else will ever know about. That the night shift exists in a kind of legal and social blindness. Security cameras malfunction. People don't remember faces. Shifts change. Records get lost. The person working 2 a.m. is the most invisible person in the city, and the people who come during those hours are the ones who've learned that too. I quit 3 months after the police interview. I couldn't work those hours anymore. I'd catch myself studying the faces of people who came in late at night, trying to determine if they were predators or prey or just insomniacs. I'd see ordinary people buying coffee and wonder about their invisible histories. The night shift had cracked something open in my perception that I couldn't seal back up. The worst part is knowing that the man I saw, if he was involved, if I'd actually witnessed something significant, probably just transferred locations. Predators that sophisticated don't get caught. They learn the rhythm of night shift work. They learn which stores have absent managers, which cameras have blind spots, which shifts rotate through workers too tired to remember details. The night shift isn't a job. It's a hunting ground, and the people who work it are standing in the clearing without realizing there are eyes in the darkness. I saw that woman's name in the news one more time, about a year later. Cold case update. No new developments. The ex-boyfriend was convicted without her body ever being found. I don't know if he did it. I know that someone else knew her fate before it happened. And I know that I stood in a fluorescent-lit box, drinking stale coffee at 2:47 a.m., watching a man speak her death like it was a weather report. The night shift taught me that the world is full of people who are vanishing, and we pass them on our ways to work without recognizing what we're seeing. We see bruises and assume falls. We see fear and assume sadness. We work overnight and think we're just stocking shelves and ringing up transactions, but we're actually witnessing the secret life of the city, the real predations, the real violence that happens in the hours when most people are sleeping and oversight is minimal. I work in data entry now, 9 to 5. I haven't worked night shift in 7 years. I still get strange dreams about the fluorescent lights. I still think about that woman sometimes. I still wonder if the man ever got caught, or if he just evolved, learned better strategies, became more invisible. And I know for certain that he didn't stop. My name is Marcus Webb, no relation to anything you've heard about me before, I'm sure. I worked the night shift at a psychiatric hospital for 8 years, not as a doctor, as an orderly, as the person who walked the hallways in the 2 a.m. hours when the senior staff was minimal and the patients were supposed to be sleeping but rarely were. Psychiatric hospitals are different at night. The structure that holds them together during the day, the doctors, the therapists, the visiting families, all disappears. What remains is the building itself and the people inside it whose minds are fundamentally fractured. And you, the overnight worker, stuck between 2 entirely different realities. I got the position because I needed money and didn't ask questions. The hospital needed people willing to work graveyard shifts, and they weren't too selective about background checks. My first week, an older orderly named Thomas pulled me aside and said, "There's one rule. Never, ever go to the 3rd floor after 11 p.m. unless it's a medical emergency. And if you do have to go, you walk fast, and you don't look in the patient rooms." I asked why. He said, because some of them stop pretending at night. During the day, they wear masks for the therapists. They perform sanity, or at least manageable insanity. But when it's dark and there's no one watching, except someone like you who doesn't matter, they let you see what's actually in their heads. I didn't take it seriously. I was 26 and thought I understood psychology because I'd taken intro courses. I thought I understood mental illness because I'd read about it. I thought I understood human behavior. I was arrogant in the way that young people are arrogant. I had frameworks that made me feel safe from understanding. My 3rd night on 3rd floor, I learned different. Around 1 a.m., a patient named Samuel started screaming. Not words, sound. Pure, sustained, agonal sound. The sound of something in absolute distress. I went to his room. He was sitting on his bed, perfectly upright, eyes open, just screaming. No facial expression, no tears. Just sound like his throat was a loudspeaker and something else was operating it. I called for a nurse. They sedated him. He stopped immediately, mid-scream, like someone had switched him off. But here's what stayed with me. The moment before the sedative took effect, his eyes focused on me. And I saw something in them that I haven't been able to describe in the 7 years since. It wasn't madness. Madness is chaotic. This was ordered, intentional. It was the look of someone who had been screaming because screaming was necessary. And the screaming had a purpose I couldn't perceive. The next night, a different patient, a woman named Claire, asked me to sit with her during her breakdown. She was having what the chart called dissociative episodes. What it looked like was a woman fragmenting in real time, her entire body twitching, her speech cycling through different voices. One voice was hers, educated, articulate. One was much younger. One was masculine. One was something else entirely, something that sounded like it was trying to learn English by listening to radio static. She grabbed my wrist and held it with impossible strength. We'd have to chemically restrain her later. And she said, "He's here. He's always here. In the space between when you close your eyes and when you sleep. He lives there." Then the masculine voice, "She's lying. I'm everywhere. I'm in the walls." Then that other sound, F, 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 F. Not a word, a frequency. I reported it. The nurse on duty said they'd adjust her medications and make a note. She treated this like a routine update, like I'd reported a blood pressure reading. And I realized something that shifted my entire understanding of working night shift in a psychiatric hospital. The staff wasn't there to heal these people. They were there to contain them, to keep them functioning at a level society could tolerate. The hospital wasn't a hospital, it was a warehouse. Night shift made that warehouse much more apparent. Around the 4th week, I found something. I was doing a routine check of the supply closet on 3rd floor when I noticed a loose panel behind the shelves. Behind it was a space, and in that space were drawings, hundreds of them. Pencil drawings on newspaper, on the backs of hospital forms, on anything that could hold a mark. They were all the same image. A figure, humanoid but wrong, with too many joints in its limbs, with a head that was too large and too flat. And surrounding it, layered upon it, was text. Words written in increasingly small handwriting, spiraling inward, becoming illegible, then becoming visible again in increasingly small loops. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But I read some of the text. It was a patient's handwriting. I recognized the style from their medical charts. And it was a name, repeated thousands of times. Thomas, 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 Thomas. Over and over, smaller and smaller, surrounding the impossible figure. I asked about Thomas the next day, the orderly who'd warned me about 3rd floor. The newer staff member I asked didn't know any orderly named Thomas. I checked the employment records. There was a Thomas who'd worked night shift in the hospital, but he'd been gone for 17 years. He'd vanished during his shift in 2001. He'd clocked in for night shift, never clocked out, never showed up again. The hospital had filed a missing person report, but nothing came of it. But patients were still drawing him, still drawing that figure surrounding the repetition of his name. In a hospital where, according to the records, Thomas had never existed, where no current staff member remembered him, where the only evidence of him was in the repetitive drawings of people whose minds were fractured. I quit the next week. I reported what I'd found to hospital administration. They took a report and assured me it was likely a historical artifact. Patients sometimes fixate on past staff members. But they didn't seem surprised. They didn't seem alarmed. They seemed like they were managing something they'd been managing for a long time. I worked night shift in psychiatric facilities for another 7 years after that, moving between hospitals, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. And I learned that every facility has a Thomas. Every graveyard shift in mental health has a person, staff or former staff, who becomes a focal point for the patient's collective consciousness. Someone who appears in their drawings, their hallucinations, their fractured narratives. Someone who seems to have been there long enough that they've become woven into the actual structure of the place. I don't know if Thomas was real. I don't know if he was a person or a symbol, a manifestation of something that patients were perceiving on a level we don't have language for. But I know that psychiatric hospitals at night are places where the distinction between individual and collective consciousness becomes very thin, where patients who shouldn't know each other's histories seem to share the same delusions, where the night shift worker becomes a witness to something that operating rooms and therapists' offices would never allow. The worst part of night shift in psychiatric work isn't the violence or the unpredictability. It's the recognition that you're watching minds that might be perceiving something more clearly than you are, that their fragmentation might be a response to something real, that their drawings of impossible figures might be their only way of describing what they're actually seeing. I haven't worked in psychiatric facilities for 3 years. I work in a regular hospital now, day shift, where the worst that happens is typical medical emergencies. But I still think about those drawings. I still think about the name repeated infinitely smaller, spiraling inward. I still think about Thomas, real or otherwise, and what it means that entire populations of fractured minds all focused on him, all drew him, all seemed to be trying to warn the night shift workers about something we couldn't perceive. Night shift in mental health taught me that sanity and insanity aren't as clearly divided as we like to believe. That there might be people perceiving genuinely disturbing truths that we've trained ourselves not to see. And that the night shift worker is always standing in the space between the two, visible to people whose minds have slipped the constraints of conventional perception, trusted by a system that is fundamentally about concealment.
I don't know what happened to Thomas. I don't know if he was murdered or if he integrated into the hospital's infrastructure in some way, became so much a part of the place that he simply stopped existing as a discrete entity. But I know he's still being drawn, still being named in smaller and smaller handwriting by minds that the hospital has warehoused in the dark. My name is Jennifer Alesso, and I worked night shift at a highway rest stop for 4 years. People think rest stops are boring. They're not. They're a threshold. They exist between destinations. People stop at rest stops at 3 a.m. when they're driving through the night, when they're alone in their cars, when they're making decisions they wouldn't make in daylight. They're a place where people's secrets are temporarily visible. The specific rest stop I worked at was on I-76, about 30 miles outside of a mid-sized city in Pennsylvania. It had bathrooms, a small convenience store, a parking area, some picnic tables that no one used. It had a night shift attendant, me, who worked alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It had security cameras that were ostensibly monitored, though I never saw anyone actually monitoring them. And it had a particular clientele that came through during the deep night hours. There were the truckers, mostly regular guys who knew the routine. There were the traveling salesmen. There were families road tripping and needing a break. And then there were the others, the people whose eyes had a particular quality when they got out of their cars, the ones who seemed to be fleeing something or pursuing something, the ones who used the rest stop for purposes it wasn't officially designed for. Around my second year, I started noticing a pattern. About once a week, a car would pull in around 2:30 a.m., usually a sedan, usually nondescript, usually with the windows tinted. A man would get out and go to the bathroom. He'd be in there for exactly 12 minutes. Then a different car would pull in, and a woman would get out and go to the bathroom. She'd be in there for exactly 12 minutes. Then they'd both leave, not acknowledging each other, not making eye contact. I mentioned it to my supervisor. He said, "Don't worry about it, not your problem." But after about 2 months of this, I started to wonder if I was watching something I shouldn't be, if there was an exchange happening, some kind of transaction that used the rest stop as a neutral location. I started checking the bathrooms after they left. Nothing obvious. No packages, no cash, no evidence of anything. But there was always something I couldn't quite identify. A smell, sometimes a piece of trash that seemed like it had been deliberately left. Once I found a note in the women's bathroom, written in cramped handwriting. "Tell them I'm still here. Tell them I didn't leave." I immediately reported it to police. An officer came and took a statement. He confiscated the note. I never heard anything back. But the pattern continued. Same man, same schedule, same woman, different each time. Different cars, different times, but the same temporal structure. 12 minutes. Always 12 minutes. Like they were measuring something. Like the time itself was the transaction. I started researching. I looked up missing person reports from the region. There were several, young women mostly, who'd vanished from the highway corridor. One had last been seen at a rest stop. When I reported this to police, they explained that rest stops are common last stop locations for missing persons. It didn't mean anything unusual. Disappearances happened. People went missing. It was statistically inevitable. But it didn't feel statistical. It felt choreographed. Around month 4 of observing this pattern, I made a mistake. The woman arrived one night, and I went into the bathroom after she left. I was looking for something, though I didn't know what, and I found it tucked behind the toilet tank, a photograph. Polaroid, old, showing a woman who looked like she'd been taken without her consent. There were hands visible in the frame. Not the woman's hands, someone else's hands holding her down. I called police immediately. They arrived with more officers than usual. They photographed the bathroom. They took my statement. And then one of the officers, a detective, asked me something that changed everything. Have you ever noticed if any of these women are asking for help? Like coded messages or signs in the bathroom? I hadn't. The question assumed knowledge I didn't have. It suggested that women, multiple women, might have been leaving messages at this rest stop, that there was a pattern of distress I'd been walking through without seeing it. The detective could see that understanding on my face. Yeah, he said, you should probably check the bathrooms more regularly. Look for things that don't belong. I did, starting that very night. And I found them. Messages written in very small handwriting on the inside of stall walls. If you read this, call the police. I'm being held against my will. Another one. His name is R. He keeps me locked in a room when we're not driving. He says if I tell anyone, he'll... The message cut off mid-sentence. There were at least 7 messages, all in different handwriting, all describing the same situation. Women being transported by men, women being held captive in between the rest stop visits, women using the bathroom as their only opportunity to reach out, knowing that someone might read their messages. I reported all of it. Police came again. They took photographs. They assured me they were investigating. And then, nothing happened. Days went by. The man and the rotating women continued their pattern. Same schedule, same 12 minutes, same everything. A week after I found the messages, the woman I'd seen most frequently came through again, the woman who appeared most in the cycle. She looked worse than she had before, thinner. Her eyes had that kind of flatness that comes from extended psychological trauma. After she left, I found another message. My name is Katie. If you're reading this, please remember my name. He's going to kill me. I can feel it. He's running out of patience. Please remember that my name is Katie Sutton, and I lived in Delaware before he took me. I immediately called police. They came. They took her name, and they told me that there was an ongoing investigation, but they couldn't discuss details. They told me to be careful, but not to confront anyone. They told me to keep detailed records of when people arrived and what I observed. I did all of that. For 3 more months, I watched that pattern. Same man, same rotation of women, same 12 minutes, same messages left in bathrooms. And then one day, the man came in and the woman didn't show up for her 12-minute window. He waited in the parking lot for 20 minutes, which was unusual, which broke pattern, and then he left. He never came back. The woman never came back either. Katie Sutton, according to police, was not reported missing through any official channels. She simply was never observed again. I've thought about that many times, about whether that absence meant something good had happened, that she'd escaped, that police had rescued her, or whether it meant something worse. Whether the man had decided that the schedule, the routine, the carefully measured 12-minute windows were no longer sustainable. I quit working night shift at the rest stop 6 months later. The whole situation had shifted my understanding of what I was doing there. I wasn't maintaining a facility. I wasn't helping people who needed a bathroom break during long drives. I was a silent witness to human trafficking, and my silence, enforced partly by police, partly by my own fear, made me complicit. I've followed Katie Sutton's missing person case for years. It's still open, still unresolved. Her photograph is sometimes shared on cold case websites and social media, but she was never officially found. The man was never officially arrested, and the rest stop where she left her final message continues to operate 24 hours a day, staffed by night shift workers who are probably witnessing things just like I did, probably not reporting them, probably feeling the same helplessness. What night shift work teaches you, across all these different locations, all these different situations, is that there are entire realities operating parallel to the one we think we're living in. There are people being transported, contained, and controlled by others, and they're passing through spaces we occupy regularly. There are predators operating on schedules we could track if we paid attention. And there are night shift workers standing at the threshold of these realities, seeing fragments, collecting pieces of evidence that nobody seems to want to fully investigate. The night shift is when the rules change, when oversight disappears,
When people believe that what happens in darkness doesn't count the same as what happens in daylight. And that belief creates an environment where the worst aspects of human nature can flourish, undocumented and unpunished, for years. I never found out what happened to Katie Sutton. I never found out if the man was caught. I never found out if the trafficking ring was broken, or if it simply moved to different rest stops, different highways, different thresholds between destinations. But I know that someone is still seeing things like I saw them. And I know that the information is being collected, filed away, forgotten about. And I know that the night shift continues in rest stops and convenience stores and psychiatric hospitals across the country, and people are vanishing on schedule with as much regularity as a man and a woman using a bathroom for exactly 12 minutes. The night shift is where we disappear, and everyone is too tired to remember.